Deborah sits in the back pew of Victory Chapel, watching her youngest cousin, a girl she once babysat, say I do. She counts silently, 42. 42 weddings in 17 years, and not once has she been the bride. As the reception guests cluster near the buffet table, their whispers float back to her like smoke. What is wrong with her? Maybe she's too picky. At her age, she should just settle. Deborah's fingers find the empty space on her left hand where a ring should be, where everyone says a ring should have been years ago. Then she feels the warmth of her mother's hand on her shoulder. Mama Grace leans close, her voice low and certain. The clock of man is ticking, my daughter, but the calendar of God is just reaching your page. Deborah wants to believe her. She's just not sure she can afford to hope anymore. Deborah is the lead choir director at Dominion Covenant Church, a woman whose voice can silence a restless congregation mid-whisper, whose worship can make even the hardest heart soften. She wants the companionship of a godly husband, someone to build a home with, to pray with in the early morning quiet, go. But her flaw is the fear of the shelf, the suffocating belief that her beauty, her value, her worthiness are all expiring with every birthday candle, every wedding invitation, every concerned look from well-meaning relatives. We see her alone in her bedroom that night, pulling out an old photograph from a shoebox, a man she almost said yes to 10 years ago out of sheer desperation. She holds a match to the corner of the photo, watching his face curl and blacken in the flame, and makes a silent vow, if God doesn't move now, she will stop asking. She will accept that some prayers go unanswered, some stories don't get their ending, some women are meant to walk alone. The reception drags on like a wound that won't close. Deborah stands near the dessert table, forcing herself to smile as Aunt Felicia approaches with that familiar look, the one that mixes pity with barely concealed judgment. Deborah, my dear, Aunt Felicia begins, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You look lovely. Still singing at that church, yes. Yes, Auntie. Aunt Felicia's eyes scan Deborah from head to toe, lingering on her bare ring finger. You know, my neighbor's son just returned from America. An engineer. Not too handsome, but at your age, we can't be too choosy, can we? The words land like stones in still water. Before Deborah can respond, Uncle Thomas joins them, his breath smelling of palm wine and entitlement. Deborah. Still waiting for Jesus to come down and marry you himself. He laughs at his own joke, slapping his knee. In my day, a woman your age would have 3 children by now. Deborah's smile freezes on her face, but it's Mama Grace who cuts through the cruelty like a sword through darkness. In God's day, her mother says quietly, appearing beside her with the authority of a woman who has spent decades on her knees in prayer, my daughter's story is being written with intention, not desperation. The delay you see as punishment, he sees as preparation. Uncle Thomas opens his mouth to argue, but something in Mama Grace's eyes, a certainty that transcends explanation, silences him. He mutters something about getting more food and walks away. Aunt Felicia lingers a moment longer, her expression softening slightly. We just worry, Grace. She's such a good girl. Why would God let her suffer like this? Suffering. Mama Grace's hand finds Deborah's. My daughter isn't suffering. She's waiting. There's a difference. As the aunties drift away, Deborah leans into her mother's shoulder. Mama, what if they're right? What if I've been waiting for something that isn't coming? Mama Grace turns to face her daughter fully, her eyes bright with unshed tears and unshakable faith. Listen to me carefully, Deborah. I prayed for you before you were born. I dedicated you at the altar when you were 8 days old. And 17 years ago, when you were 21, I had a dream. Deborah's breath catches. Her mother has never spoken of this dream. In that dream, I saw you in a wedding dress, but the groom's face was covered in light, so bright I couldn't see his features. And a voice said to me, tell her to wait. Tell her the delay is divine protection, not divine rejection. Tell her that when the light reveals his face, she will understand why it had to be him and only him. Tears stream down Deborah's face as her mother pulls her close. Your time is coming, daughter. And when it comes, everyone who whispered will witness. Everyone who doubted will bow. Because your story isn't just about you getting married, it's about God getting glory. 17 years earlier, a young man named Daniel sat in a cramped hostel room at the University of Ibadan, his pen hovering over a piece of paper that held all his courage. He'd seen her only twice, once at a campus fellowship meeting where her voice during worship had pierced through his carefully constructed walls, and again at the library where she'd dropped her books and he'd helped gather them, their fingers briefly touching over a worn copy of Psalms. Her name was Deborah. He'd learned it from asking around, feeling foolish and young and utterly undone by a woman whose face he could barely remember but whose voice haunted his dreams. The letter took him 3 hours to write. He introduced himself, explained that he felt led by something he couldn't name to reach out to her, asked if they could meet for a conversation, nothing forward, nothing presumptuous, just a chance to know each other as believers walking the same path. He folded the letter carefully, wrote her name on the envelope, and sealed it with a prayer. The problem was that Daniel didn't know where Deborah lived or studied. But he knew her friend, a girl named Blessing who lived in the same hostel block. He'd seen them together at fellowship, laughing and sharing Bible verses like sisters. He found Blessing outside the female hostel, her smile bright and welcoming when he explained his mission. A letter for Deborah. Blessing's eyes flickered with something Daniel couldn't read. Of course. I'll make sure she gets it today. Daniel thanked her profusely, feeling lighter than he had in months. He returned to his room and prayed, a simple prayer asking God to open the door if it was meant to be open, to close it if it wasn't. What Daniel didn't see was Blessing standing alone beneath the hostel stairwell 15 minutes later, reading his letter with trembling hands. She'd loved Daniel from afar for nearly a year, sat 3 rows behind him at fellowship, memorized his schedule, convinced herself that one day he would notice her. And now he'd written a love letter to her best friend. Blessing's fingers tightened on the paper. She thought of Deborah's easy confidence, her effortless grace, the way men's eyes followed her even when she wasn't trying. Deborah had everything, talent, beauty, the favor of leadership. Did she really need this too? Blessing walked to the hostel incinerator behind the kitchen where they burned trash every evening. She stood there for a long moment, Daniel's words in her hands, her conscience screaming at her to stop. But jealousy is a poison that makes even good people do terrible things. She dropped the letter into the flames and watched it curl into ash. Then she went to Deborah's room and told her friend about her day, every detail except the one that would have changed both their lives. That same week, Daniel waited for a response that never came. He took Deborah's silence as God's answer, clear and definitive. He buried his disappointment and moved forward, never knowing that his letter had been reduced to smoke before it ever reached its intended recipient. And so, 2 lives that were meant to intersect 17 years ago continued on parallel tracks, neither knowing how close they'd come to finding each other, neither understanding that the delay wasn't about divine rejection, but about divine timing in the face of human interference. Ezekiel collapses on a Tuesday morning while tending his yam farm. By the time Mama Grace finds him, his lips are blue and his breathing is shallow. The hospital in town can't handle his condition, something about his heart, the doctor says, using words like advanced and deteriorating that make Deborah's world tilt sideways. They transfer him to Lagos, to a teaching hospital where the machines beep in rhythms that sound like countdowns. Deborah takes leave from her teaching job and spends her days in the hospital corridor, smelling antiseptic and fear in equal measure. On the 5th day, Ezekiel wakes up. His eyes find Deborah immediately, and something in his gaze makes her want to run. "Come closer," he says, his voice thin as paper. She sits beside his bed, taking his hand, the hand that taught her to farm, to pray, to stand firm when the world pushed back. "Deborah." He pauses, gathering strength. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer truthfully." "Yes, Papa." "Why are you still alone?" The question is a knife between her ribs. Of all the things he could ask from what might be his deathbed, why this? "Papa, please don't." "No." His grip tightens with surprising strength. "I'm your father. I have carried this question for 17 years, and I'm running out of time to hear the answer. Did I do something wrong? Did I fail you somehow? Did I make you afraid of men by being too strict?" Deborah's tears come fast and hot. "You didn't fail me, Papa." "Then why? You're beautiful. You're accomplished. You love God. So why does my daughter go home to an empty house every night while girls half her age are bouncing grandchildren on their knees? The words are cruel not because they are angry, but because they are desperate. Ezekiel isn't attacking, he's pleading. I don't know, Papa. Deborah's voice breaks. I've asked God the same question 1,000 times. I've fasted. I've prayed. I've examined my life for hidden sin, for unforgiveness, for anything that might be blocking my blessing. And I get nothing but silence. Ezekiel's eyes fill with tears. I want to walk you down an aisle, Deborah. I want to see you in your mother's wedding dress before I die. Is that too much to ask God? Papa, you're not going to die. We are all dying, daughter. Some of us just know the timeline better than others. He coughs, his body shaking. Promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll stop waiting for perfect and start accepting possible. Promise me you won't let pride or impossible standards rob you of a family. Promise me that when I close my eyes for the last time, I know my daughter won't be alone. The promise sits on Deborah's tongue like a stone. She knows what he's really asking, for her to settle, to compromise, to choose companionship over conviction. To marry someone good enough instead of someone God sent. I promise I won't be alone, she finally says, the words carefully chosen. But I can't promise I'll settle for less than what God has for me. Even if that means waiting longer. Ezekiel closes his eyes, a single tear sliding down his weathered cheek. Then pray your God moves faster than my heart is failing. Because I'm tired, Deborah. I'm so very tired. That night, alone in the hospital chapel, Deborah weeps until she has no tears left. Her father's request sits on her chest like a physical weight. For the first time in 17 years, she allows herself to ask the question she's been too afraid to voice. What if God isn't moving slowly? What if he isn't moving at all? Blessing arrives at the hospital the next day with a basket of fruits and a smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. She's been Deborah's closest friend since university, the sister she chose, the one person who has walked every year of this 17-year wait with her. Or so Deborah believes. How's Papa Ezekiel? Blessing asks, settling into the plastic chair beside Deborah in the waiting area. Stable. Weak, but stable. Deborah doesn't mention yesterday's conversation. Some wounds are too fresh to expose. Blessing squeezes her hand. He'll pull through. Your father is strong. Remember when he chased that thief off his farm with just a machete and righteous anger? They both laugh, the sound brittle in the sterile hospital air. Then Blessing's expression shifts into something Deborah knows too well, that careful, concerned look that always precedes a helpful suggestion. You know, Deborah, I've been meaning to tell you. Brother Michael from church, the accountant, he asked about you again last Sunday. Deborah tenses. Brother Michael is 48, twice divorced, with 3 children who are barely younger than Deborah. Blessing, we've talked about this. I know. You want God's best, not man's leftovers. But Deborah. Blessing's voice drops to a whisper. What if God's best comes in packaging you weren't expecting? Brother Michael is financially stable, he's a believer, and he's genuinely interested. Isn't that enough? It's the same conversation they've had a dozen times with different names attached. Brother Michael. Brother Ton who smelled like cigarettes despite claiming he'd quit. Brother Chidi who still lived with his mother at 42. Every time Deborah has shown interest in someone Blessing didn't suggest, men closer to her age, men with aligned visions, men whose presence didn't make her spirit recoil, Blessing has had reasons why they weren't suitable. Sister, I heard he's not truly born again. He just comes to church for business connections. Deborah, I saw him with another woman at the mall. You deserve better. That one. His family has a history of unfaithfulness. My cousin knows his brother. Looking back now, sitting in this hospital while her father's heart struggles to keep beating, Deborah realizes something she's been too trusting to see before. Blessing has spent 17 years steering her away from possibilities and toward impossibilities. Every decent man who showed interest, Blessing found fault with. Every unsuitable man, Blessing championed. It's so subtle, so consistent, that Deborah has accepted it as friendship instead of recognizing it for what it actually is. Sabotage dressed in concern. Why do you do this? Deborah asks quietly. Blessing blinks. Do what? Push me toward men I have no peace about while warning me away from anyone I might actually connect with. For just a moment, one unguarded heartbeat, something dark flickers across Blessing's face. Then the mask slides back into place, perfect and impenetrable. Deborah, you're upset about your father. You're not thinking clearly. I'm your friend. Everything I do is because I love you and want to protect you. But the seed of doubt has been planted, and 17 years of blind trust begins to crack like dry earth before rain. When last did you celebrate something good happening to me without finding a way to diminish it? Blessing stands abruptly, her basket of fruits forgotten. I don't have to listen to this. I came here to support you, and you're attacking me. I'm not attacking. I'm asking. Well, maybe I should leave you to figure things out on your own then. Maybe you don't need a friend who actually tells you the truth instead of feeding you fairy tales about God's perfect timing. She walks away before Deborah can respond, her heels clicking against the hospital floor like accusations. And Deborah sits in the waiting area, watching her best friend disappear around the corner, wondering how many years of her life have been stolen by someone she trusted with her heart. Stories like this, stories about betrayal disguised as friendship, about the ways people we love can become the very obstacles standing between us and our destiny, they matter because they remind us that sometimes the greatest battles aren't against obvious enemies but against the shadows cast by those who smile while sabotaging. If this moment resonates with you, if you've ever had to question who truly wants your good, then maybe this story deserves to be heard. Deborah leaves the hospital at 11 p.m., but instead of going to her mother's house where she's been staying, she drives to Dominion Covenant Church. The night guard recognizes her and unlocks the sanctuary without question. He's seen her here before in the darkest hours, heard her worship and weeping through the walls. The church is empty, the pews casting long shadows in the dim security lights. Deborah walks to the altar where she's led worship for 15 years, where her voice has carried prayers to heaven week after week, year after year. She removes her shoes and falls to her knees on the cold tile floor. God, I'm here, she whispers into the darkness. I'm here again, like I've been here 1,000 times before. And I need you to speak because I can't carry this weight anymore. The silence presses against her like water, and for a moment, she wonders if she's finally reached the place where even prayer feels pointless. But she came here for a reason, and she won't leave until it's done. I'm making a vow tonight. Like Jephthah. Like Hannah. I'm putting everything on the altar, my desire for marriage, my need for vindication, my father's dying wish, all of it. If you want me to walk this road alone, I'll walk it. If you want me to remain unmarried until I'm 90, I'll remain. But I need you to take this burden from me because it's crushing me, and I can't breathe under the weight of everyone's disappointment anymore. The tears come then, not gentle tears of surrender, but violent sobs that rack her body. She weeps for the 42 weddings she's attended as a spectator. For her father's weakening heart and his desperate request. For 17 years of waiting that feel like wasted years. For the friendship she thought was solid but might have been quicksand all along. I release it, she chokes out between sobs. I release the timeline. I release my expectations. I release the man I thought would come and the life I thought I would have. If your plan is for me to serve you single, then give me the grace to do it with joy instead of bitterness. Just please, please, take away this feeling that I'm being punished for something I don't understand. Something shifts in the atmosphere. Deborah can't explain it, can't even describe it properly, but the weight on her chest lightens just enough for her to breathe. The silence doesn't feel oppressive anymore, it feels expectant, like the pause before a storm breaks. She stays on her knees until sunrise, not speaking anymore, just being present in the quiet. And in that sacred space between midnight and morning, between surrender and expectation, she hears it, not an audible voice, but a knowing that settles in her spirit like a stone dropping into still water. The wait is almost over. Hold on just a little longer. When Deborah finally leaves the church at dawn, she feels different. Lighter. The fear of the shelf hasn't disappeared completely, but it no longer has the power to define her. She's laid it all down, truly laid it down, and whatever comes next, she'll face it standing upright instead of bent double under the weight of her own desperation. She doesn't know that at this exact moment, 400 kilometers away, a man named Daniel is waking up from a dream where he heard a voice singing a song that made his spirit cry. A song he's heard only once before, 17 years ago, in a university fellowship meeting he attended on a whim. She doesn't know that God's calendar, which has been turning pages slowly and deliberately for 17 years, is about to reach the chapter where their stories finally intersect. All she knows is that she's done fighting. And sometimes, surrender is the door that opens when everything else stays locked. The regional prayer conference comes to town like a spiritual hurricane, posters plastered on every street corner, radio announcements, church bulletins buzzing with anticipation. Pastor Elijah, the prophet whose ministry has sparked revivals across West Africa, will be leading 3 days of intensive prayer and worship. Deborah initially doesn't plan to attend. Her father is still in the hospital, improving but fragile, and she's exhausted from the emotional warfare of the past weeks. But Mama Grace insists. You need to be there, her mother says with that tone that brooks no argument. The word I received years ago, it's about to manifest. I can feel it in my spirit. So on Friday evening, Deborah finds herself in the overflow crowd at Unity Arena, a massive event center packed with over 10,000 believers. The worship is thunderous, the prayers are fervent, and the atmosphere crackles with expectation. Pastor Elijah hasn't even taken the platform yet, but already people are weeping, prophesying, speaking in tongues. Deborah stands in the congregation, her hands raised but her heart guarded. She's been to conferences before. She's heard prophetic words that seemed to promise everything but delivered nothing. She won't let herself hope too easily anymore. 400 kilometers away, Daniel sits in his Lagos apartment staring at a conference poster someone shoved into his hands at the bus stop. He wasn't planning to travel this weekend, he has work deadlines, responsibilities, a structured life that doesn't leave room for spontaneous road trips. But that dream won't leave him alone. For 3 nights straight, he's dreamed of a woman singing, not her face, just her voice. A voice that sounds like heaven breaking through. And each time he wakes, he hears the same whisper, go to Ibadan. Find her. It makes no logical sense. Daniel is a project manager at a construction firm, a pragmatic man who doesn't make decisions based on dreams and impressions. But there's something about this pool that feels different from anything he's experienced before. At noon on Friday, he calls his boss and takes an emergency leave. By 3 p.m., he's on a bus to Ibadan with nothing but an overnight bag and a growing sense that he's either following God or losing his mind. Possibly both. He arrives at Unity Arena just as the evening session begins, slipping into a seat near the back. The arena is massive, the crowd is overwhelming, and Daniel has no idea what he's supposed to be looking for. He just knows he's supposed to be here. Pastor Elijah takes the platform, a small man with a powerful presence. He opens his mouth to speak, then pauses, his eyes scanning the crowd like he's searching for something. There's a word from the Lord tonight, he says slowly. A specific word for 2 people in this place. I don't know who you are yet, but God is about to connect something that the enemy disconnected 17 years ago. If that's you, if you've been waiting 17 years for something you couldn't name, I need you to pay very close attention to what happens next. Deborah's breath catches. 17 years. He said 17 years. In the back of the arena, Daniel sits forward, his heart suddenly pounding against his ribs. The Lord says, I've been preparing you both in separate wildernesses for this exact moment. The delay wasn't denial. It was divine protection from premature union and strategic positioning for covenant purpose. And tonight, I'm pulling back the veil. Pastor Elijah's eyes sweep across the thousands of faces, and then he does something unexpected. I need the worship leader to come forward. Now. Deborah's legs nearly give out as the coordinators escort her to the platform. She's led worship at her local church for years, but this is different, 10,000 people, cameras, a prophet whose words have a reputation for accuracy that's almost frightening. Pastor Elijah looks at her with eyes that seem to see past her face into her history. What's your name, daughter? Deborah, sir. How long have you been waiting for your husband, Deborah? The question is so direct, so public, that Deborah wants to run. But something roots her feet to the platform. 17 years, sir. A ripple moves through the crowd. Pastor Elijah nods slowly. The Lord showed me something about you. He says you've been faithful in the wait, but you've also been tormented by the wait. You've questioned your worth, your beauty, whether you're being punished for something you can't identify. Is this true? Deborah can't speak. She just nods, tears already streaming. The Lord says to tell you, you were never being punished. You were being protected. There was a connection meant to happen 17 years ago at a university, a letter that never reached you because someone you trusted destroyed it. But God says what the enemy stole through betrayal, He's about to restore with interest. Deborah's knees buckle. Pastor Elijah catches her arm. Do you understand what I'm saying? No, Deborah whispers. I don't understand any of it. You will. Now sing for us. Sing that song you sang at university fellowship meetings, the one about God's faithfulness. Deborah's mind goes blank. She hasn't sung that particular song in years, hasn't even thought about those fellowship meetings in over a decade. But as the musicians start playing softly behind her, muscle memory takes over. Her voice rises, clear, anointed, breaking through the noise of 10,000 people until the entire arena falls silent. She sings about waiting on the Lord, about strength renewed like eagles, about how those who trust in Him will never be ashamed. In the back of the arena, Daniel stands abruptly, his face draining of color. That voice. That impossible, unforgettable voice. It's the voice from his dream. The voice from 17 years ago that he heard once at a university fellowship and could never forget. The voice that made him write a letter he thought was rejected. He begins moving through the crowd, pushing past people who give him annoyed looks. His heart is hammering so hard he's dizzy, but he can't stop moving. He has to get closer. He has to see her face. Pastor Elijah sees him coming before anyone else does. The prophet's eyes lock onto Daniel, and a smile breaks across his face. Stop the music, Pastor Elijah commands. The worship dies abruptly. Deborah's voice cuts off mid-phrase. The silence is absolute. Young man, Pastor Elijah calls out, pointing directly at Daniel. How long have you been waiting for your wife? Daniel stops in the middle of the aisle, 10,000 pairs of eyes suddenly on him. His mouth is dry. 17 years, sir. The arena erupts in gasps and exclamations. Pastor Elijah's smile widens. Come here. Both of you, come stand before me at this altar. Deborah's legs are shaking as she watches a stranger walk toward the platform. He's tall, with kind eyes and a face that strikes her as somehow familiar even though she's certain she's never met him. He climbs the steps and stands 3 feet away from her, and the look in his eyes is one of recognition and wonder and something close to grief. Pastor Elijah places a hand on each of their shoulders. Look at each other. Really look. They turn to face each other fully, and the moment their eyes meet, something clicks into place, like a key finding its lock after years of searching in the dark. Do you know each other? The prophet asks. No, Deborah whispers. Yes, Daniel says at the same time. The conference coordinators move them to a private room behind the platform while the worship continues. Pastor Elijah sits across from them, flanked by 2 other ministers, and the expression on his face is one of holy curiosity. Now, he says calmly, someone needs to explain what's happening, because the Lord showed me the ending but not the middle of this story. Daniel speaks first, his voice rough with emotion. 17 years ago, I was a student at University of Ibadan. I attended a fellowship meeting where I heard someone sing, and it marked me. I didn't know why. I just knew I needed to meet her. So I wrote a letter and gave it to her friend to deliver. He looks at Deborah. The letter was for you. Your name is Deborah. I never forgot it. Deborah's hand flies to her mouth. I never received the letter. I know. Because the friend I gave it to, a girl named Blessing, she never gave it to you, did she? The name lands like a bomb. Deborah's face goes white. Blessing. My Blessing. I don't know if she's yours, Daniel says quietly. But she took my letter and made it disappear. I waited for weeks for a response. When none came, I assumed you weren't interested or that God was telling me no. I moved on with my life, but I never forgot your voice. And then 3 nights ago, I started having dreams about that voice again. A clear instruction to come to Ibadan, to come to this conference. So I came, not knowing why, just trusting that God had a reason. Deborah is shaking now, the pieces assembling into a picture so devastating she can barely breathe. Blessing has been my best friend since university. She's been with me through every year of this wait. But even as she says it, the memories start reshaping themselves. Every decent man Blessing warned her away from. Every terrible man Blessing encouraged her toward. 17 years of subtle sabotage hidden behind the mask of friendship. She destroyed your letter, Deborah says, her voice hollow. She's been destroying my chances for 17 years. One of the ministers in the room clears his throat. We need to be careful about accusations. No, Pastor Elijah interrupts. The Lord already confirmed it. This isn't accusation. This is revelation. The enemy used someone close to Deborah to steal years that belonged to both of them. But here's what the devil didn't account for: what he meant for evil, God has turned for good. Because if they'd met 17 years ago, they wouldn't have been ready for each other. They needed the wilderness. They needed the refining. They needed to become individually who they had to be before they could become collectively what God designed. Daniel is staring at Deborah like he's seeing the sun for the first time. I've spent 17 years building a business, learning to hear God's voice, breaking generational patterns in my family. I thought I was just surviving. But maybe I was being prepared. I've spent 17 years learning to worship through pain, Deborah whispers. Learning to trust God when nothing makes sense. Learning to surrender my timeline. She looks at Daniel fully now. I don't even know you. Not yet, he agrees. But I'd like to. If you're willing. Pastor Elijah stands, signaling the other ministers to give them privacy. We leave you two to talk. But understand something, this moment, this divine appointment, it's not just about you finding each other. It's about God getting glory from the restoration of what was stolen. Your story is going to encourage thousands of people who are waiting, who are wondering if God has forgotten them. Don't waste it. As the ministers file out, Deborah and Daniel sit in the small room, strangers who share a history they never lived, trying to figure out how to build a future from the ruins of 17 stolen years. Tell me about yourself, Deborah finally says, her voice barely above a whisper. And Daniel, with tears in his eyes and hope in his voice, begins to answer. They talk for 3 hours in that small room while the conference continues without them. Daniel tells her about his childhood in Lagos, about his father who died when he was 16, about the construction business he built from nothing, about the string of relationships that never felt right because he was always comparing every woman to a voice he heard once at a university fellowship. Deborah tells him about her village, about her father's failing heart, about 42 weddings attended as a guest, never as a bride, about the midnight surrender just days ago when she finally released her timeline to God. I burned a photograph, she admits, her voice cracking. Of a man I almost married out of desperation. 10 years ago, when the weight felt unbearable, I almost said yes to someone I didn't love just to make it stop. But something in me couldn't do it. That was God protecting you, Daniel says quietly. Protecting you for this. But 17 years, Daniel. 17 years we could have had. He reaches across the table and takes her hand, the first time they've touched. The contact sends electricity through both of them. Or 17 years we needed to become people worthy of each other. Deborah, I wasn't ready for you at 21. I was arrogant, undisciplined, more in love with the idea of love than with God. If we'd gotten together then, I would have failed you. I would have hurt you. The man you met today only exists because of the fire of those 17 years. Deborah's tears fall freely now. I've been so angry at God. So hurt by the delay. So have I, Daniel admits. There were years when I stopped praying altogether because I felt like I was talking to silence. But now, sitting here with you, I understand something I couldn't see before. God wasn't ignoring our prayers. He was answering them in a way that required time we didn't want to give. Because the miracle isn't just that we found each other. The miracle is who we became while we were apart. A knock on the door interrupts them. One of the coordinators pokes her head in. Sorry to disturb, but there's someone outside who's demanding to see Deborah. A woman named Blessing. She says it's urgent. Deborah's hand tightens on Daniel's. I'm not ready to face her. You don't have to be ready, Daniel says. But maybe she needs to face what she did. Not for her sake, for yours. You need closure on that betrayal, or it will poison what we're trying to build. Deborah takes a deep breath, then nods. Let her in. Blessing enters the room like a storm, her eyes wide, her face streaked with mascara. She's clearly been crying, and when she sees Daniel and Deborah sitting together, hand in hand, she stops dead. It's not what it looks like, Blessing says immediately, her voice desperate. I can explain. You destroyed his letter, Deborah says quietly. 17 years ago, Daniel wrote me a letter, and you burned it instead of giving it to me. Is that about right? Blessing's face crumples. Deborah, I was young. I was jealous. I thought if you didn't meet him, maybe he'd eventually notice me instead. So you stole 17 years of my life because you wanted him for yourself. I didn't know. Blessing's voice rises, cracking with emotion. I didn't know it was the letter. I didn't know you two were supposed to be. I thought I was just buying myself time. But then years passed, and you kept waiting, and I realized what I'd done, and I couldn't figure out how to fix it without destroying our friendship. So instead, you spent 17 years sabotaging me. Deborah stands, her voice steady despite the tears. Every good man who came along, you found reasons why he wasn't suitable. Every terrible man, you encouraged me toward. You didn't just steal the letter, Blessing. You stole my discernment. You made me doubt myself until I couldn't tell the difference between God's voice and my own fear. Blessing drops to her knees. I'm sorry. God, Deborah, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was wicked. I've been living in torment for years knowing what I did, but I was too much of a coward to confess. Daniel watches the scene with an expression that's hard to read. Did you ever love Daniel? Or was it just about winning? Blessing looks at him, and the truth is written on her face. I don't even remember anymore. I just know that my jealousy turned me into someone I don't recognize. The room falls silent except for Blessing's quiet sobs. And in that moment, Deborah faces a choice that would define the rest of her story: bitterness or grace, vengeance or mercy, the right to hold this betrayal over Blessing's head forever or the freedom that comes with forgiveness. She thinks of her midnight surrender. Of laying everything on the altar. Of the voice that whispered, hold on just a little longer. I forgive you, Deborah says, and the words cost her everything. Not because you deserve it. Not because it doesn't hurt. But because God forgave me for 17 years of doubt and bitterness, and I can't receive His mercy while withholding mine. Blessing sobs intensify. Deborah doesn't reach down to comfort her, that would be dishonest. But she also doesn't walk away. She stands there, holding the pain and the grace in equal measure, while Daniel watches her with wonder in his eyes. Because this is the woman the 17 years created, not bitter, not broken, but refined into someone who can hold both justice and mercy without collapsing under the weight of either. Sometimes the hardest grace to extend is the kind that costs us our right to remain wounded. But that's also the grace that finally sets us free. If you've ever had to choose between holding on to hurt or releasing someone who doesn't deserve your forgiveness, if you know what it costs to let go, then maybe this moment speaks to something in your own story. Maybe it's worth carrying forward.